on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, we'll look at the media's shameful treatment of a bishop that was attacked, the victim of an alleged terror incident. A Melbourne businessman avoids jail and his name's suppressed for 20 years after pleading guilty to child sex offences. I'll speak to Stephanie Bastian about that case. Also joining me tonight is Daniel Wild. We'll cross to Army Horowitz with the latest US news, and Darren Grimes will join me from London. And as always, plenty of Lefties Losing It tonight, featuring another meltdown from an MSNBC anchor.
This is a world. They give their viewers anything to try to make America look bad. They are obsessed.
But first, more information is coming out about the alleged attacker involved in the Wakeley church incident. The Daily Telegraph spoke to a man who claimed to know the boy, who said the accused teen terrorist had been mentally poisoned about religion in the lead up to the attack. The 16-year-old is understood to be Muslim. New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb said the suspect was known to police but was not on any terror watch lists. But while not much is being said by authorities or the media about the rise in Islamist sentiment in this country, particularly at rallies that are supposed to be pro-Palestinian but often seem to be religiously motivated, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist rallies, but we can't talk about the rise in Islamist ideation. No, the media is too busy vilifying a man who has just been repeatedly stabbed. Some publications seem to be fixated on the supposedly controversial sermons of Christian Bishop Mari Emanuel, almost suggesting he invited hostility. Hate me, accept me or reject me, the inflammatory words of Bishop stabbed in Sydney attack, reads the Sydney Morning Herald. Inflammatory, really? The piece starts with this. The bishop targeted in Monday night's stabbing attack in Western Sydney has previously claimed the Islamic prophet Muhammad and other religious figures cannot be compared to Jesus, made inflammatory comments towards the LGBTQI plus community, and fought against COVID lockdowns and vaccines. Really? So 9 papers still pro-lockdown? They're still pro-lockdown zealots in 2024? Are they still pretending that COVID vaccine mandates were a fantastic idea? It wasn't just the 9 papers. News.com.au highlights what it called the bishop's colourful past in a piece that doesn't even include a name. The anonymous journalist writes about the bishop's hardline views on American politics, evolution and marriage. Again, so-called hardline views are that he's not a fan of President Joe Biden, who is, and what a shock that a religious leader may hold religious views about marriage and evolution. And let's have a look at Yahoo, who ran with this headline: stabbed Sydney priest is a viral lockdown and COVID vaccine skeptic. In a frankly ridiculous piece masquerading as news coverage, we had this. The Christian Orthodox bishop who was stabbed in Sydney's second knife attack in 3 days is a fire and brimstone preacher known for his anti-LGBTQ views and scepticism over COVID vaccines. In July 2021, at the height of the pandemic, he described lockdown restrictions as mass slavery. He claimed that the risks posed by COVID-19 had been exaggerated. And the article ends with this. The motive for the knife attack is unknown, and there is no suggestion at this stage that it had anything to do with the bishop's views on lockdowns or vaccines. No kidding. I mean, really, the state of the media in this country, the bulk of the media seem completely out of touch with at least half the country. So much so that they are alarmed that a religious leader would have religious views. This is a man who prayed for his alleged attacker. Despite his own injuries, he was focused on others. Let's hear now from the bishop. This is a sermon that is being circulated widely.
And when you get attacked, I know it's ugly. I know sometimes it is unbearable. But in a way, you need to thank God. You know why? Because if you're getting attacked, that means Christ is really very close with you, in you. So thank the Lord and say, Lord, it's very unbearable, this trial, but you're with me. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23.
Let's bring in the Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, Daniel Wild. Daniel, what do you make of this coverage? I've just been shocked to describe what we have seen as inflammatory. I don't know, maybe there's some sermons I've missed, but I imagine if they had something worse than what they've written, they would have published it.
Yeah, I think so, and it's an example of disgraceful victim blaming. Now, I haven't watched all of his sermons. I'm sure I don't agree with everything that he says, but what he says is irrelevant. He's a victim of a stabbing. The New South Wales Police have declared this a terrorist incident. It was a religiously motivated terrorist incident. That's what needs to be dealt with. We've clearly got a problem in our society. The sectarian conflict and division is now spilling out into the community. That reflects years of failed migration program. You know, we've talked about the massive numbers of intake, and I'll note that yesterday it was revealed that we had over 100,000 people enter our nation on a net basis in just 1 month, the first time that's happened in our history. And now clearly we have issues with social cohesion. The federal Labor government is hopelessly divided on this issue. They were quick to sort of have this two-way statement about this situation, but gave a leave pass to those who were protesting at the Sydney Opera House. So, look, there's a real issue here, and Australians are looking for political leadership, and we're not getting it.
Well said. Now, Lisa Wilkinson proclaimed outside court on Monday that she had been vindicated. What she had broadcast about Bruce Lehrmann and his rape of Brittany Higgins had been found to be true. But that's not the full story. The real vindication, really, if you ask me, is for Fiona Brown and Linda Reynolds. Justice Michael Lee was dismissive of any suggestion of a political cover-up, which, after all, was the story 10 were pushing, a high-level cover-up where a victim was being forced to choose between her career and the pursuit of justice. There now calls for Brittany Higgins' $2.4 million payout to be probed. Will the National Anti-Corruption Commission end up looking at this case, Dan?
It should do, in light of the judgment from Justice Lee, but I wouldn't be holding my breath. I've got to tell you, Justice Lee has sort of restored a bit of my confidence in the justice system. I thought he was able to give a very erudite and clear assessment of the entire case. Nobody other than the staff that you mentioned came out looking better than when they went in, whether it was the media organisations that were pursuing eyeballs for advertising revenue, politicians trying to gain political advantage, or indeed the individuals themselves who the Justice said were not reliable witnesses and had a problem with the truth. Look, I think Australians are concerned about the payout and they want to know the truth about that, and also want to draw a line under this entire affair because it's been, I think, a fairly shameful period in the lives of so many.
Yes, former Liberal staffer Fiona Brown, I think, is the only one who came out of this unscathed. Justice Lee was pretty glowing about her credibility. He noted the hardship she'd gone through, and I think he was fairly scathing of Channel 10's treatment of her. Now, let's talk about this case out of Belgium. Brussels police shut down the National Conservatism Conference just as Nigel Farage was speaking. He was on stage when this happened. There are also going to be other big names there. Hungary's Viktor Orban, Conservative MPs, including Suella Braverman and Miriam Cates. The Mayor of Brussels, though, said he had issued an order banning the conference to guarantee public safety, adding the far right is not welcome. The far right, this is just wildly illiberal, Dan, sinister.
Well, it is. And look, it shows a couple of things. You know, as we've talked about before, the left is scared of debate. the people at that conference, and that conference has now been going for a number of years, there are some serious people. It's not just politicians, there's academics and public intellectuals that are trying to provide context to those in the West about, where do we go from here, given all the challenges that we have. And it's concerning that it's victim blaming, like we just talked about. Now, apparently, by having a conference and inviting speakers that are considered to be controversial, you're somehow inviting violence and that you're the one that's going to be shut down. It should be the other way around. Yes. Police should be protecting the conference to protect free speech and debate, but it's been flipped on its head.
To me, it's astonishing that you could have someone like Suella Braverman labelled far right and a danger to the public. The fact that she would be taking to stage to speak amongst leaders and thought leaders is somehow dangerous in Brussels. I mean, for the love of God. Now, let's come back to a crucial issue in this country. The government's nature positive plan has thankfully hit a road bump in West Australia. The Labor Party there are warning it's not going to be popular, and Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek will now stagger the plan. That's angered Green Group stand, but this plan is still a hot mess. It's going to be catastrophic, not just for mining, but really so many other vital projects.
Well, you're right. There's not an aspect of our society that the nature positive plan wouldn't impact. Now, yes, there's been a minor back down, but the government is still going to proceed with the controversial Environmental Protection Agency. And what the Samuel Review recommended or talked about, and this was the major review into our environmental laws, it said you can have an Environmental Protection Agency, but it needs to be limited to compliance and enforcement. Instead, what the government is proposing is that this EPA would be in charge of approvals of projects. These are major resources projects. Now, there's a couple of problems. The first is that the role of the minister would be diminished. In our Westminster system, whether you agree or disagree, it must be the minister that decides on project approvals. And secondly, we all know where this is going to go. It's going to be an untouchable bureaucracy filled with activists that only consider the environmental side, but not the economic and social side.
Well, that is precisely what's going to happen. And just through the process, the so-called consultations, the lack of transparency there, the lack of information that's been put forward for such an enormous plan with wide-reaching consequences. I'm shocked that they're still proceeding with this. Is this delay or staggered approach just to try to save WA come their election next March?
It certainly looks political, and WA would be the state that is hardest hit given the importance of a resources sector. You're right to mention the transparency. There's been no real consultation about this. It's been shrouded in secrecy.
The consultation seems to be done in secret, which to me is questionable in itself. What's the point of having consultations if there's no transparency?
And if it's such a great plan, what do you have to hide? Why not bring the public along with you? So clearly they're trying to hide something. They've been caught out. But like I say, this EPA is a concern.
Absolutely. Now, children's rights campaigner Billboard Chris, we've had him on this program, has submitted a notice of appeal against the e-safety commissioner in this country, Julie Inman Grant, over her takedown order for his post where he supposedly misgendered a trans activist. Tell me the latest with this case. It's a fascinating one. It's one that got international attention. People were shocked that this was happening in Australia, and you would think the e-safety commissioner would have bigger priorities, I don't know, child exploitation for one, than to bring down posts on X.
Yeah, that's right. Look, there is a serious issue with the exposure of children to, graphic and obscene content, and it needs to be dealt with. The problem that you've got here with this e-safety commissioner, she's an activist.
Absolutely.
She will continue to expand her role to police the internet, to censor debate in a way that's consistent with her own ideological views. We're just talking about the EPA. It's the exact same problem. You have these unelected bureaucrats that have vague powers, and they will fill it with their views. And she has a track record of censorship, and it only ever targets one side. And unfortunately, we're seeing that happen again.
And let's not forget, we've mentioned it before on this program, she was appointed by the coalition government. This isn't some Labor appointment. This is another an example of the coalition wasting power. You do wonder why, what's the point of voting for them?
Well,
they kind of just appoint lefties to run the bureaucracy.
And also the misinformation and disinformation laws that started under Paul Fletcher when he was communicating. Now, this government's gone way further, but they permitted it through allowing it to go as far as it did.
Dan Wild, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Belgium and the Netherlands are the latest countries calling for puberty blocker restrictions after the UK's CAS review exposed the astonishing lack of research into the gender treatment's long-term effect on children. But here in Australia, there's simply no appetite to even review the practice, let alone ban it, with Health Minister Mark Butler insisting while the CAS report findings were significant, our transgender pathways were different, really. If anything, new laws introduced in New South Wales and Victoria around so-called anti-conversion therapies mean once children self-identify, there's very little anyone can do to stop them getting medical interventions. Joining me now is Research Fellow at the Women's Forum Australia, Stephanie Bastian. Stephanie, Mark Butler claims Australia's transgender pathways are different to the UK. The ABC reports that most doctors and institutions and even the government have cautioned against applying the findings here, arguing the settings are very different in Australia. Are they right? Can we afford to ignore the CAS review?
No, we can't, Rita. And Australia's model of care is actually based on the UK. What we have here is a government who are putting their heads in the sand, I think, to avoid further scrutiny that will arise when we do, in fact, hold an inquiry. I think also we need to be taking a closer look at ACON. Now, ACON is a registered charity that receives tens of millions of dollars, taxpayer funds, as an organisation. They have enormous influence over the government and the media, and they're not dissimilar to Stonewall in the UK. Now, in 2018, Stonewall bent over backwards to suppress early evidence that was emerging that showed the harm that these medical transitioning practices were having on children. In fact, they called for the evidence to be shredded. Now, this week, Teddy Cook, who is a director of ACON, came out. She is also a former vice president of AusPath, which is a subsidiary of WPath. Now, she came out and criticised the CAS report, accusing it, and I quote, of ignoring key evidence and research. We need to hold an inquiry as soon as possible because we know what the evidence is. It's written in the CAS report. In fact, the CAS report refers to Australian studies in its findings.
Yeah, the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne gets a couple of mentions in that report, from what I understand. Now, the ABC's reporting on the Giggle versus Tickle women's rights case has, well, that's been something else. Astonishingly bad, even by the ABC standards. Look at this headline, claiming that Sal Grover ran a 2-year public campaign against transgender woman. They seem to be publishing news pieces, this is supposed to be, not opinion, parroting lines from the trans activist Roxanne Tickle, who is suing Sal Grover. And they're at the forefront, the ABC, of pushing trans ideology in this country. How have they gone about reporting the CAS review findings, or the NHS banning puberty blockers in youngsters, or the detransitioners who are coming out and suing their doctors and health authorities?
Well, the ABC were very late to the table on the CAS review, Rita, and they platformed views of many people pushing back, condemning the findings of the report. So I think there's certainly a level of bias. It's interesting because with the Tickle versus Giggle reporting, much of the media was surprisingly very reasonable. Even the left-wing Guardian reported Sal's supporters as women's rights activists as opposed to the anti-trans rhetoric that they usually push out. So I think the ABC are increasingly making the case that they are not fit for purpose. They need an investigation, and they really shouldn't be taking all these taxpayer funds to run these agendas through their newsrooms. I mean, they've got a whole social media section that's dedicated to people like Tickle. So I think there needs to be an investigation, and I think the funding, or much of their funding, should be withdrawn, and they should get back to basics of just reporting the news around the country.
And more praise for The Guardian, the far-left Guardian. This is unusual on this program, but they certainly did a much better job than the ABC. Their Observer editorial slammed the NHS for categorically failing children in their care. Where is the ABC? Well, we're not seeing any sort of reporting like that from the ABC. Now, to this case from Victoria, and I'd like to advise our viewers that this story contains distressing content. I've got rid of a lot of the detail because it is ugly. But an anonymous Melbourne businessman has avoided jail after pleading guilty to child sex offences. The judge described his actions as disgusting, reprehensible, and frankly deeply disturbing, and yet he formalised a 20-year suppression order making it illegal for anyone to publish this man's name, to publish any sort of details like age, other identifying details, and suspended his 15-month jail sentence. So he walked free from court. He does have links to prominent legal figures in the Victorian justice system, and he continues to work as a consultant in his field. How do we call this justice, Stephanie? I can understand why so many people read the details of this case and are left confused.
I think it's very concerning, Rita. It seems that those that know the law have a better way of getting around it. I just hope that the judge has made sure that there's mandatory precautions in place to ensure he gets the help that he needs to deal with the problems that he clearly has. I want to just address his crimes, though, Rita, because there seems to be part of a broader problem in our culture. And we have a culture that is hypersexualised, hyper-porn, hyper access to pornography, through things like Pornhub, where even minors can access it. We need to start having a collective conversation about the fact that we have issues in our culture with male sexuality and child sex abuse. We've got trafficking going on in far north Queensland that deal with minors, and it's an uncomfortable conversation that we need to have. No one seems to want to talk about it. It seems to be this case-by-case detail where we hear of these reports of child sex offences happening. But we need to look at why and why it's so prevalent.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the access to pornography and how young people are getting that access to very graphic pornography. And I don't think we've really looked at what impact that has on a society and on children as they grow up, getting exposed to that material. Stephanie Bastian, thank you so much for your time this evening. Still to come, Army Horowitz on the latest lunacy afflicting the US. And talking about lunacy, we've got plenty of lefties losing it right after this. Welcome back, and now it's time for Lefties Losing It. And where would we be without the loony bin that is MSNBC? Let's have a look at Joe Scarborough's latest delusional meltdown.
Iran, why did Iran do what Iran did, knowing what the outcome was going to be? Because they didn't want to screw with the United States of America.
Say what now? The Iranian regime raining down hundreds of missiles and suicide drones on Israel is a sign that they're scared of the Biden administration, they're scared of America. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Not at all the ravings of an irrational imbecile. Now, let's listen to Joe claim that it's conservatives who hate America, not the anti-West left.
This is a world. They give their viewers anything to try to make America look bad. They are obsessed with trashing America when America is stronger, more powerful than ever before. Its economy stronger and more powerful than ever before.
Its economy is stronger than ever before. It's standing in the world better than ever before. Is this man gaslighting himself? I'm starting to fear for his health. Even some of his own panellists look a little concerned about this deranged rant.
But you would never know this because they are fed a steady stream of hate America first rhetoric.
That guy is looking around, perhaps wondering when the men in white coats will appear. Now, let's check in with trans activist and brand ambassador Dylan Mulvaney. Here is more girlhood cosplaying. The kids have a saying called FAFO, F around and find out, and that can be neatly applied to this next lefty losing it, who was very bold making death threats, but it soon ended in tears, literal tears. Let's have a look at Rita Patel threatening the Bakersfield mayor and councillors for not supporting a ceasefire. Strap yourselves in for this one.
I don't have faith that you'll do this. You guys are all horrible human beings, and Jesus probably would have killed you himself. And the thing is, though, it's very clear to me as someone who's been an organizer for the past couple of years that none of you care because you guys don't care about anything happening in Palestine or any other country where oppression occurs because you don't care about the oppression occurring here. And I understand that you guys are all horrible people. I remind you that these holidays that we practice, that other people in the global south practice, believe in violent revolution against their oppressors. And I hope one day somebody brings the guillotine and kills all of you mother. So regardless of whether you elect people into office, they'll backstab you, they'll let you die, and for that reason, you guys want to criminalize us with metal detectors, we'll see you at your house, we'll murder you.
Yeah, that saw Patel arrested immediately. It turns out you can't just threaten to murder people in their own homes just because you're a lefty losing it.
Ms. Patel, that was a threat, what you said at the end, and so the officers are going to escort you out and take care of that.
And the next time we saw Ms. Patel, she wasn't so bold. No, she was weeping, and as they say, FAFO.
A deputy public defender entered not guilty pleas on Patel's behalf to 8 counts of threatening a public official and 10 counts of making terroristic threats.
And more mass disruptions across the US with pro-Palestinian protesters shutting down roads, highways, bridges. Here they block both directions of the Golden Gate Bridge for hours. And it's not just the US. Look at these lefties in Canada pledging their allegiance to a terror leader. Yes, Sinwar. That's the leader of Hamas, one of the masterminds of the October 7 attack. But in Montreal, they're chanting, "We are your men, Sinwar." Disgusting, disgusting. Let's take a look now at how these fed-up travellers prevented from reaching O'Hare International Airport responded to the protesters blocking the roads. Yeah, I can understand why she gave them the finger. They're forced to drag their bags across lanes of traffic to try to reach the airport on foot because these lawless lefties feel entitled to block roads, disrupt plans, destroy people's livelihoods, or just a holiday they may have saved for years to afford. The law-abiding citizens seem to have very little protection there. It's the lunatics running the asylum in Chicago. The judge in Donald Trump's New York hush money trial is accusing the former president of trying to intimidate a potential juror. The juror in question was trying to explain why she had posted a video on social media showing people celebrating on the streets of New York when Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. Trump was muttering something to his lawyer, she spoke, and this judge decided that amounted to intimidation. He also decided that an individual who had posted anti-Trump content on social media was a fit and proper person to sit in the jury pool. The bias of this judge is overwhelming. Let's not forget his daughter, Lauren Merchant, has raised at least $93 million in campaign donations for Democratic clients of her consulting firm using the case in their solicitation emails. Let's bring in journalist and filmmaker Ami Horowitz. Ami, this is happening in your hometown. Tell me the latest on this criminal case.
Yeah, why did you have to add insult to injury by mentioning it's my hometown? I think that was unfair, although true. Look, I think this is, this is an example. This is exactly this is playing right into Trump's hand, right? He's saying that it's stacked against him. Of course it is. I mean, here he was looking at potential juror pool, right? He's in Manhattan, so already everything is stacked against him in terms of the demographics, the political demographics of the city. And here you have a woman, by the way, who lives in my town, the Upper West Side, which for sure means she's anti-Trump. And she's dancing and partying at an anti-Trump rally. What do you expect him to do but to mutter to himself? And just him talking to himself, thinking about how crazy this is that she's in this possible jury pool. The judge says you are intimidating the witness. Look, this crystallizes the broader problem that Democrats have, right? That he does something so small and all of a sudden you make it this huge witness intimidation thing. It's the same thing when Biden goes, here is Donald Trump. He's anti-democratic. He's going to be a dictator. Look, this hyperbole will fail. This dog won't hunt. The American people understand that this is craziness, and therefore they're going to side with Trump. This is a crystallization, underlines the broader problem that Democrats have.
Well, the headlines in this country, because the bulk of our media just follows the MSNBC talking points, the headlines are Trump accused of witness intimidation and Trump warned about witnesses. So no one's actually reading down to the detail to see how absurd this claim by the judge is. But I think in America, you're far more awake to what's happening. Now, let's talk about the figures coming out of the US border crisis, millions coming in illegally, as we have discussed in the past, through that southern border. The humanitarian parole program is also adding hundreds of thousands coming in from countries like Haiti. But that's not enough, because there's also what are called the getaways. These are the record numbers who come through undetected. The estimates are around 1.8 million have come through since 2021. And let's look at how they do it. As Fox News's Bill Muldoon notes, they all step into the same footprints as they walk, and then they use branches to clear the tracks behind them to make it harder for Border Patrol to track them. This footage is well, it's worrying, Ami. They're mainly male, military age. Do we know much more about them?
Yeah, look, no, by definition, we don't know a lot about them because they are getting in illegally. They're illegal aliens. Yeah, I use that term. More on that later. And so we don't know, but I'll tell you what I'll tell you this, is that we are bombarded in our media with examples of criminal behavior by these illegal aliens. We've seen violence, illegal behavior, and now what we're seeing, this new kind of trend we're seeing, this idea of squatting. Now, I don't know if people in Australia understand what this concept means, but in the blue states here, what they've done is they've legalized people essentially stealing homes. I know that sounds crazy, but essentially if you break into a home and you are there for more than a certain amount of days, you would now have legal rights to that home, despite the fact you have zero connection to it, and it becomes very difficult for the real owners to kick you out. So these illegal aliens are now gaming the system, and we're now bombarded with new images of these illegals now squatting in homes and taking over homes. Look, I know Biden wants to do nothing for the border because he thinks that's some kind of electoral win from him, but just from the sense of self-preservation, this thing is so out of control, you would think he'd want to do something just for his own electoral prospects. Never mind that he doesn't care that we have open borders, right? That's really his philosophy. But just from a self-preservation concept, he would think he would do something. He's so bad at this, Rita. He's so bad at this. This is why Trump is beating him consistently in the polls for things like this.
Well, he's got other problems as well. The anti-Israel protests are intensifying around the country. You've got bridges being blocked from San Francisco to New York, Intifada being called for. There is violence. There's mass disruption, anti-Semitic chants. They're even burning American flags, Army, something that is becoming very, well, not commonplace. It's not quite commonplace, but they're very casual about it these days. Not long ago, that would have caused widespread outrage. Is this impacting Joe Biden's decision-making? Is he feeling these domestic pressures and that's influencing his foreign policy?
Let me think about that one. Duh. Yeah, of course it is. And by the way, a massive miscalculation on his part. Look, my daughter just texted me literally 5 minutes ago. She goes to Binghamton University, which has actually been a pretty pro-Israel school, a school that I felt comfortable sending her to because it has a large Jewish population. She just told me they just voted for BDS to be enacted at Binghamton University. It is shocking that it has reached even to that level, a very relatively pro-Israel school with a large Jewish population. No, the president is making a very crass political decision, which is I'm going to turn on Israel because I think that that will get me the margin of votes I need in Michigan, in Minnesota, in Georgia. He is absolutely incorrect. Those people are already not voting for him. Turning on Israel will make absolutely no difference. But let me tell you something. His turning on Israel is exactly what led to Iran to bomb Israel. Make no mistake about it. If his precipitous and foolhardy Afghanistan withdrawal beget the Ukrainian invasion, which it did, his turning on Israel and Gaza beget the Iran invasion. You are crazy if you don't think so. And by the way, Iran didn't calculate wrong. He's already calling for de-escalation. What? What is he talking about? Israel was just hit with 300 missiles and drones. The only reason why they didn't get in is because of this technological miracle that Israel had with its air defense. But Israel has to treat this attack. I don't know if a lot of people are calling for this. You have to treat this. Your doctrine has to be, you have to treat it as if every missile hit its target. That's the way you have to respond. Because if you don't, all you're doing is telling your enemies, I can attack you with no repercussions. That's what you're doing. And if it gets through finally, I will decimate you. Yet this president is already preempting and pushing and pressuring Israel not to respond in the massive way that it needs to.
It is absurd to suggest that Israel's had a win because Iran did limited damage with this attack. And that seems to be the narrative that's being pushed widely, that Israel doesn't actually need to have a counterattack because they've already won. The Iran was ineffective in its attack. Now, you mentioned the word illegal alien earlier and how contentious that has become. And a North Carolina high school student, poor kid here, Christian McGee, was suspended from his school for saying illegal alien in the classroom. From what I can work out, he said the term in the correct context, in an accurate context. It's a legitimate phrase to describe something, but apparently his use of the term illegal alien, Army, is offensive to Hispanic students.
Yeah, look, this is an example of the left continue its corruption of language. It's Orwellian, literally, as Orwell said, that thought corrupts language and language corrupts thought. Illegal alien is in our legal code. Illegal alien is in the dictionary. It's absolutely the right term to use, yet the left uses it because they want to change culture. That's exactly what they are doing.
Army Horowitz, always a pleasure to get your insights. Thanks for your time tonight.
Pleasure is mine.
And still to come, Harry and Meghan try to salvage their Netflix deal by making a show about polo. I'm sure there's a huge market for that. And a disturbing development in Glasgow University. Darren Grimes, next. Welcome back. The new Lord Rector at the University of Glasgow has been elected by the student population, and though Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta is a surgeon, he manages to sound like some radical socialist.
And in the words of the immortal Bobby Sands, our revenge will be the laughter of our children. Hasta la victoria siempre.
Oh dear, and it gets worse. Dr. Ghassan was barred from Germany this week over safety concerns and fears for public order, possibly because he's currently under investigation by the actual adults at the University of Glasgow for praising terrorists, sitting next to one at a memorial and tearfully eulogising a terror group leader whose organisation was later involved in the October 7 massacre. GB News host Darren Grimes joins me now. Darren, what is going on in Glasgow?
Oh, absolutely, Rita. I mean, Ghassan Abu Sitta, he could do with sitting the hell down, couldn't he? Because this is a man who represents, I would argue, some of the most virulent, hard-left, vile politics that we've seen unleashed across the West since October the 7th. I mean, I look at this hard left vagabond, right, and I just feel utter despair for the state of Britain's universities. They really have become breeding grounds for some of the most virulent Jew hate and terror eulogizing. You know, this is a man that's viewed as too much for Germany, but is somehow all right for the student population of Glasgow. Now, it's got me scratching my head because this chap clearly has more red flags, Rita, than a May Day parade in Moscow, right? Barred from Germany, all right for Glasgow. This isn't for nicking towels from a hotel room, right? This is for being a bit too vocal in a way that made the authorities ponder if he's the kind of fella that they want giving speeches in Deutschland, right? Not the usual tourist experience there to sit next to terrorists and be comfortable in their company and all too vocal in their support, right? They've been digging through basically the comments that he's made over his career, waxing lyrical about folks that frankly most would cross the street to avoid. There was this Ahmed Jarrah chap who's known for anything other than peace-loving activities, and it's not the best look. Here's a man that's so clearly blinded by hatred of Israel that murder becomes justifiable in the name of a cause. Let's not forget that the IRA that he quotes was responsible for the murder of scores of innocent men, women, and children here on mainland Britain. And being elected as rector, it's not like winning a raffle at a church fete. This is a significant role with influence over the student body, right? So these students, I think, need to take a good hard look in the mirror and a good hard look at this man's so-called work, because I doubt they're all steeped in loathing in the same way he is. This is a bloke that's been hobnobbing with plane hijackers and handing out attaboys to terrorists in a position now where he's supposed to be representing the best interests of students. What about the Jewish students there, Rita? That's what I want to know.
Yes. Well, they must not be feeling very welcome at that campus at all because he's elected by the student population. Now, I want to talk to you about former Cabinet Minister Braverman. You know I like her. I think she should be the leader. She should be Prime Minister. And she is causing headaches for the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. She says as long as he is PM, the UK will not leave the European Convention on Human Rights. The PM was threatening to do that after the ECHR ruled that inaction on climate change could be considered a breach of human rights. Now, why is the UK a party to this convention, Darren? And does it threaten a nation's sovereignty?
Absolutely it does, because now we have one of the rights enshrined by the European Court as being action on climate change, Rita. So these are activist judges. It's an activist judiciary that puts forward so-called rights, which basically represent their views, and they force governments who are party to this this agreement, the ECHR, to actually follow out its political demands. I would argue that whilst Britain is party to the ECHR, we cannot have border controls, and we certainly cannot have common sense and rationality when it comes to the net zero nuttiness. I really think it is time that we do leave. I think it's people who argue that the United Kingdom, it cannot have human rights without this foreign court. Look across the world at Australia, New Zealand, Canada. They don't have jurisdiction of foreign courts lecturing them on what they can and cannot do. Yet you all manage to have human rights. You all manage to basically enshrine everything that the United Kingdom has stood for throughout its history, stretching back almost 1,000 years to the Magna Carta. Are we really suggesting that the United Kingdom doesn't know a thing or two about human rights and enshrining rights in law? It's an absurdity. We must be able to control our own borders. We must be able to do what you guys did in stopping the small boats, in stopping rampant illegal migration to your shores, because we're seeing the consequences of inaction. And the consequences of inaction, dare I say, are the kinds of things that we've seen happen on our streets since October 7th, the kind of things that we saw outside the Sydney Opera House, the kind of things that we've seen week in, week out in the streets of London. I really do agree completely with Suella Braverman. I think Rishi Sunak is a weak Prime Minister. I think there are far too many in that cabinet who are too scared of actually governing for themselves and being responsible for themselves. And they would be quite happy actually to say, well, we can't have border controls, we can't have robust action on these points because the European Court forbade it so, because that takes accountability away from these weak-minded, weak-willed politicians. And that's what I find so reprehensible. So yes, we do need strong action and leadership from the likes of Suella Braverman.
And this is why you had a national vote. You had a vote and the people backed Brexit, and it seems like that's never been fully implemented, the spirit of that vote. Now, before you go, we have to talk about Prince Harry. It's been a while, and there's news that he's working on a new documentary, a new project for Netflix. They call it a docu-series, but really, Darren, it's a reality show like the last one they did that was just mind-numbingly boring. This one, though, is on a topic that Prince Harry is actually knowledgeable about, polo. But is there a massive market for documentaries on polo, Darren? Who's going to watch this?
Well, absolutely. There clearly isn't a market for that. You know, polo, it's quite a niche sport. I don't think it's overwhelmingly popular anywhere in the world, really. It's basically what I would describe as a sort of a penchant for posh people. But look, this is clearly an attempt to create reality television by masquerading as a documentary on polo, when actually it's a documentary on these two and their penchant for being in the press. I would just, you know, in this country now, Rita, we're hearing, because as you well know, the royal family are going through their own problems at the moment with the His Majesty King Charles III and, of course, the Princess of Wales out of action after cancer diagnosis. And some people are suggesting that we bring back Prince Harry to the United Kingdom in order to help share the burden. Now, I'm sorry, but whilst he was here, he didn't want to share the burden, did he? Meghan Markle didn't like rainy charity galas and good old Blighty. She didn't like a little bit of selfless charitable obligation, because they care more about press trinkets and getting money from Netflix and all of these other dirty things, selling out their family in order to sell a book that he received quite the helpful advance over. Oh, Rita, they make my skin crawl. This isn't about polo. This is about the prince. And this isn't about any kind of charitable endeavor. This is about Meghan Markle. They both put themselves first, and they always have, and they always will. I want nothing more to do with them. I'm delighted that they continue to lose their appeals to have the United Kingdom taxpayer basically be responsible for their security whilst they're here. They can pay for it themselves. They're making a pretty penny, Rita. Honestly, the two of them need to be as far away from Britain as possible. And if this acts as a deterrent from them actually coming here, well, don't count on me being too upset. I'll tell you that for free.
Well, you may have to accept them back because there's a court case in the US at the moment wanting to see if Prince Harry lied on his visa application, I think it is, about his illicit drug use. And Donald Trump has indicated that he is open to deporting Prince Harry at some point. So if that happens, we shall speak about it at length. Darren Grimes, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks very much, Rita.
That's it for me. Up next is Newsnight. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow. Good night.